Lara Foster had been working at the Harmony Wellness Spa for 2 years, and she thought she'd seen every type of client the galaxy could offer. From stressed Rigelian executives, whose tentacles cramped from too much data manipulation, to Andromedan researchers whose crystalline joints needed realignment after long hours in zero-gravity labs. Her massage table had accommodated beings whose anatomy textbooks couldn't have prepared her for. But the client who walked through her therapy room door on a rainy Thursday afternoon was different. General Knox 7 of the Kalari Defense Forces stood in the doorway like a granite mountain that had learned to walk 8 feet tall, covered in overlapping metallic plates that served as both skin and armor, with 4 arms that ended in hands, designed more for crushing enemies than shaking and greeting. "Human therapist," Knox announced in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "I require physical maintenance for combat efficiency optimization." Lara looked up from preparing her massage oils, noting that the Kalari general spoke about his body the same way a mechanic might discuss a vehicle needing routine service. "Good afternoon, General Knox. I'm Lara, and I'll be your massage therapist today. Can you tell me what specific areas are causing you discomfort?" Knox's 4 arms moved with practiced military precision as he consulted a datapad containing what appeared to be a detailed technical analysis of his physical condition. Lower dorsal armor segments exhibit 23% reduced flexibility. Secondary shoulder assemblies demonstrate decreased range of motion. Overall combat readiness has declined 8.7% over the past 6 months. Lara had worked with military clients before, but she'd never encountered someone who described their body with the emotional detachment of a weapons inspector reviewing equipment. "General, when you say your shoulders have decreased range of motion, how does that feel to you personally?" Knox's metallic features shifted into what Lara was learning to recognize as confusion. Among species that didn't naturally express emotions through facial expressions. "Feel? I do not understand the relevance of subjective sensation data. I require restoration of optimal physical performance parameters." "Right, but before we work on restoring performance, I need to understand what's causing the reduced flexibility. Are you experiencing pain, stiffness, tension?" "Pain is irrelevant. Kalari warriors do not process discomfort as a limiting factor." Lara paused in her preparation, realizing that General Knox was either the most stoic client she'd ever encountered or someone who had been trained to disconnect from his physical sensations so completely that he couldn't access basic body awareness. "General, I understand that Kalari military training emphasizes discipline and endurance. But for massage therapy to be effective, I need to know what your body is actually experiencing, not just what performance metrics say it should be experiencing." Knox was silent for several minutes, his 4 arms arranged in positions that suggested he was processing a completely foreign concept. Human therapist Lara explained the difference between performance metrics and bodily experience. Performance metrics tell you what your body can do. Bodily experience tells you how your body feels while doing it. Both types of information are important for understanding what kind of therapeutic work will help you. And you require subjective sensation data to perform therapeutic work effectively? I require understanding what's actually happening in your body, not just what measurements say should be happening. Knox moved to the massage table with mechanical precision, but Lara noticed something that his performance metrics probably didn't capture: the barely perceptible hesitation before he lay down, as if the act of positioning himself vulnerably required overcoming some internal resistance. "General, I'm going to start with some basic assessment to understand your muscle tension patterns. Let me know if anything feels uncomfortable." "Discomfort tolerance is not." "General," Lara interrupted gently, "I'm not asking about your discomfort tolerance. I'm asking you to help me understand what's happening in your body so I can help you effectively." As Lara began her initial assessment, running her hands along Knox's armored exterior to identify areas of tension and restriction, she noticed something that surprised her. Despite his claims about pain irrelevance and performance optimization, Knox's body was holding patterns of chronic tension that spoke of years of unprocessed stress, hypervigilance, and what any human therapist would immediately recognize as trauma response. "General, your shoulder assemblies, both sets, are showing signs of defensive positioning. It's like your body is permanently prepared for attack." Kalari warriors maintain constant combat readiness, but you're not in combat right now. You're in a therapeutic spa, lying on a massage table, completely safe. Why would your body still be maintaining combat positioning? Nox was quiet for so long that Lara wondered if her question had somehow offended him or violated some military protocol she didn't understand. Human therapist Lara, Kalari warriors do not distinguish between combat readiness and safety. Combat readiness is safety. What happens when you're not in a situation that requires combat readiness? All situations require combat readiness. Lara paused her assessment, realizing that she wasn't just working with muscle tension, she was working with a nervous system that had been trained to never fully relax, never completely trust the threat wasn't imminent. General, can you remember the last time you felt completely safe? The question seemed to create some kind of processing overload because Nox's forearms began moving in small, repetitive patterns that reminded Lara of self-soothing behaviors she'd observed in trauma survivors. I do not understand the concept of complete safety. What about when you were young, before military training? Did you ever feel relaxed, peaceful, like you could just be yourself without watching for danger? Nox's metallic plating seemed to shift color slightly, taking on darker tones that Lara was learning to associate with emotional processing among species that communicated through physical changes rather than facial expressions. Before military service, I was different, but that version of self was eliminated during combat preparation. It was inefficient for warrior functionality. Lara felt her heart clench with recognition of what Nox was describing, not just military training, but systematic disconnection from emotional and physical awareness in service of combat effectiveness. General, what if I told you that reconnecting with that part of yourself might actually improve your combat effectiveness rather than diminishing it? Explain this hypothesis. Bodies that are chronically tense and hypervigilant become less responsive over time, not more responsive. They lose flexibility, develop blind spots, and burn out from constant stress. But bodies that know how to relax when appropriate can access peak performance when it's actually needed. Nox was processing this information with the intense focus he probably brought to military strategy analysis. You are proposing that controlled relaxation enhances rather than compromises combat readiness? I'm proposing that your body needs to remember the difference between actual danger and the absence of danger. Right now, your nervous system is treating this massage table like a battlefield. As Lara continued her assessment, she noticed that Nox's breathing, which had been shallow and controlled, was beginning to deepen slightly, as if his body was cautiously experimenting with the possibility that complete vigilance might not be necessary in this moment. Human therapist Lara, I must inform you that I have never undergone therapeutic touch from a non-military provider. What kind of touch have you experienced? Medical treatment for injury repair, combat conditioning exercises, equipment maintenance procedures. Lara realized that Nox might have spent decades receiving only functional touch medical intervention, training manipulation, or mechanical maintenance, without ever experiencing touch that was simply caring, supportive, or nurturing. General, therapeutic massage is different from medical treatment or conditioning. The goal isn't to fix something that's broken or prepare you for performance. The goal is to help your body remember what it feels like to be cared for. Nox's forearms went completely still, and his metallic plating shifted to colors Lara had never seen before, deep blues and purples that seemed to indicate emotional territory he rarely accessed. I do not understand the military application of being cared for. There isn't a military application. Being cared for is important because you're a living being who deserves comfort and support, not just because it might make you a more effective warrior. The silence that followed this statement was so profound that Lara could hear the soft background music she'd forgotten was playing, the distant sound of other spa treatments in progress, and Nox's breathing as it continued to slow and deepen. When he finally spoke, his voice carried tones she hadn't heard from him before, uncertainty mixed with something that might have been curiosity. Human therapist Lara, no one has ever suggested that my value exists independent of military functionality. As Lara began the actual massage work, using techniques designed to help Nox's chronically defensive body remember how to relax, She realized that she wasn't just treating muscle tension. She was offering a battle-hardened warrior his first experience of safety in decades. Over the following weeks, Knox returned to Lara's massage table with the regularity of someone following medical orders. But she began to notice changes that went far beyond improved flexibility metrics. His armor plating, which had initially maintained the dull gray-green of military camouflage, occasionally flickered with warmer colors during their sessions. His breathing, once precisely controlled, sometimes became natural and unguarded. Most significantly, he had begun to ask questions that had nothing to do with combat efficiency. "Human therapist Lara," Knox said during his fourth appointment, "you mentioned that therapeutic touch is different from functional touch. Explain the physiological mechanisms that create this distinction." Lara was working on his secondary shoulder assemblies, which had begun to release some of their chronic tension. "It's not just physiological, General. Therapeutic touch includes emotional intent. When someone touches you with the purpose of providing comfort and care, your nervous system responds differently than when someone touches you for medical treatment or training. Emotional intent affects physiological response? Absolutely. Your body can sense the difference between touch that's meant to help you feel better and touch that's meant to accomplish a task. Knox was processing this information with the intense focus he brought to all new concepts, but Lara noticed that his usual analytical detachment seemed to be softening. "I have observed that my combat readiness improves following our sessions, but my overall psychological baseline also shifts toward states that Kalari military doctrine would classify as softer. How do you feel about that shift?" "I am uncertain. Softness has been eliminated from my psychological profile for 37 years. Its return creates operational confusion." Lara paused in her massage work, recognizing that Knox was describing the kind of internal conflict that often arose when trauma survivors began to reconnect with suppressed emotional capacity. "General, what if softness isn't weakness? What if it's actually a different kind of strength?" Military doctrine does not recognize softness as a strength category, but human experience does. The ability to be vulnerable, to care about others, to connect emotionally. These things require tremendous courage and strength. Knox's armor plating was shifting through a spectrum of colors Lara had never seen from him before. Deep purples and blues mixed with occasional flashes of gold that suggested complex emotional processing. "Human therapist Lara, I must share classified information that may explain my psychological confusion." "You don't need to share anything you're not comfortable discussing, General." "I am not comfortable discussing it, but I believe it may be relevant to my therapeutic treatment." Lara waited, maintaining the gentle pressure of her massage work, while giving Knox space to process whatever he needed to share. "I have not always been General Knox 7 of the Kalari Defense Forces." "What do you mean?" "Before military service, I was Knox of the Blue Mountains. I lived in a community that valued emotional connection, artistic expression, and what humans might call ... gentleness." Lara continued her massage work while processing this revelation about Knox's background, realizing that his difficulty with relaxation and emotional connection wasn't just military conditioning, it was active suppression of his original nature. What happened to Knox of the Blue Mountains? The Kalari military requires complete psychological reconstruction for elite warriors. Previous personality structures are systematically eliminated and replaced with combat-optimized psychological frameworks. They tried to erase who you were before military service. They succeeded in erasing who I was before military service. Knox of the Blue Mountains was eliminated 37 years ago. What remains is the military construct designed for optimal warrior functionality. Lara felt tears forming as she understood what Knox was describing, not just military training, a deliberate psychological reconstruction that had separated him from his original identity and emotional capacity. "General, what if Knox of the Blue Mountains wasn't actually eliminated? What if that part of you is just suppressed and it's starting to remember itself through the therapeutic work we're doing?" Knox's forearms went completely still, and his color patterns shifted to deep indigo shot through with silver, colors that seemed to indicate profound uncertainty, mixed with something that might have been hope. That hypothesis would explain why therapeutic touch feels familiar in ways that disturb military psychological frameworks. How familiar? like remembering a language I had forgotten I once spoke. As their sessions continued, Lara began to see evidence of Knox's original personality emerging through decades of military conditioning. His questions became more personal and less focused on performance optimization. His color patterns grew more varied and expressive. Most significantly, he began to respond to therapeutic touch, not just with physical relaxation, but with emotional opening that seemed to surprise him as much as it helped him. But their therapeutic progress was complicated when Knox arrived for his 8th appointment, carrying official military communication that changed everything. Human therapist Lara, I have received deployment orders. The Kalari Defense Forces are mobilizing for conflict in the Outer Rim territories. Lara felt her stomach drop as she realized that Knox's psychological healing process was being interrupted by exactly the kind of situation that would reinforce his military conditioning. When do you leave? Deployment begins in 72 hours. Duration of combat operations is classified, but typical Outer Rim conflicts extend for 6 to 18 months. How are you feeling about the deployment? Knox was quiet for several minutes, his armor plating shifting through rapid color changes that suggested intense internal conflict. General Knox 7 experiences standard pre-deployment psychological states-focused anticipation, tactical planning priorities, emotional suppression protocols activated. What about Knox of the Blue Mountains? How does he feel about the deployment? The question seemed to create some kind of internal crisis, because Knox's color patterns became chaotic and his breathing shifted from controlled to irregular. Knox of the Blue Mountains is terrified of returning to combat operations after experiencing what you call therapeutic care. He fears that war will eliminate the progress we have achieved in these sessions. Are those fears realistic? Combat operations require complete psychological focus on violence, tactical thinking, and emotional suppression. The softness you have helped me rediscover is incompatible with warfare effectiveness. Lara continued her massage work while processing the impossible situation Knox was describing. Therapeutic progress that made him more fully himself, but potentially less effective at the military role his society required him to fulfill. General, what if there's another way to think about this conflict? Explain alternative frameworks. What if the emotional connection and self-awareness you've been rediscovering actually makes you a better leader and protector, not a less effective warrior? Military doctrine does not support that hypothesis, but human experience does. Leaders who understand their own emotions and can connect with others often make better decisions under pressure and inspire more loyalty from their troops. Knox was processing this perspective with visible internal struggle, his forearms moving in patterns that reminded Lara of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. Human therapist Lara, you are proposing that I maintain therapeutic psychological developments during combat deployment rather than reactivating complete military conditioning? I'm proposing that you don't have to choose between being an effective warrior and being a whole person. Maybe Knox of the Blue Mountains and General Knox 7 can work together instead of one eliminating the other. That integration has never been attempted in Kalari military history. Maybe it's time for Kalari military history to evolve. As Knox prepared to leave for deployment, carrying with him months of therapeutic progress and a newly awakened sense of his pre-military identity, both he and Lara realized that his upcoming combat assignment would test whether the emotional connection and self-awareness they had cultivated could survive the demands of warfare, or whether his return to military operations would undo everything they had accomplished together. 3 months into Knox's deployment, Lara received a communication she hadn't expected. The message came through standard interstellar channels, but the content was unlike any military correspondence she'd ever seen. Human therapist Lara, this is Knox. I am transmitting from Forward Operating Base Meridian in the Outer Rim conflict zone. I must report unexpected developments related to therapeutic methodologies we explored during our sessions. Lara activated her communication system with growing curiosity and concern about what Knox might have encountered during his combat deployment. I have been experimenting with integration of Knox of the Blue Mountains personality elements into General Knox 7 command structure. Initial results have been unprecedented. The message continued with detailed descriptions that revealed how profoundly their therapeutic work had affected Knox's approach to military leadership. During our first major engagement, I observed that my troops were exhibiting signs of extreme stress, disconnection, and declining combat effectiveness. Standard Kalari military protocol requires pushing through psychological strain until mission completion. But I found myself applying your therapeutic assessment methods to my soldiers' emotional states. Lara realized that Knox was describing using techniques designed for individual massage therapy to understand and support an entire military unit's well-being. I began incorporating what humans might call check-ins with individual soldiers, asking not just about their tactical readiness, but about how they were experiencing the stress of combat operations. The results were initially classified as concerning by command structure. My troops began reporting emotional states more openly, requesting support for psychological strain and demonstrating increased unit cohesion. Command protocols suggested this represented decreased military discipline, but combat effectiveness metrics improved by 34%. The message included detailed data showing that Knox's emotionally aware leadership style had produced measurable improvements in his unit's performance, decision-making, and resilience under pressure. However, the most significant development occurred during a rescue operation that required my unit to evacuate civilian populations from a contested area. Lara continued listening as Knox described a situation that had tested everything they had discussed about integrating emotional awareness with military effectiveness. Standard evacuation protocols prioritize efficiency and tactical security. But when we encountered civilian families, including children, who were traumatized and unable to follow standard compliance procedures, I found myself adapting your therapeutic touch principles to military crisis management. Instead of enforcing procedural compliance, I authorized my troops to provide comfort touch to distressed civilians holding frightened children, supporting injured elders, offering physical reassurance to families separated during evacuation chaos. Knox's message included video footage of Kalari warriors beings whose military conditioning had eliminated emotional expression and physical gentleness, learning to offer hugs, hand-holding, and comforting touch to traumatized refugees. The civilian cooperation rate improved by 89%, evacuation time decreased by 43%, and post-traumatic stress indicators among evacuees showed unprecedented reduction compared to standard military evacuation outcomes. But the most unexpected result was the psychological impact on my troops. Soldiers who had been showing signs of combat fatigue and emotional suppression began demonstrating renewed purpose, increased unit bonding, and what your therapeutic framework would probably classify as healing through providing care to others. Lara was amazed to learn that Knox's soldiers had discovered the same truth. She'd learned in her massage work that providing caring touch and emotional support was therapeutic not just for the recipient, but for the provider. The message continued, with descriptions of how Knox's integration of therapeutic principles had evolved throughout his deployment. I began implementing daily unit check-ins that combined tactical briefings with emotional awareness assessments. Soldiers report not just on equipment status and mission readiness, but on their psychological state, stress levels, and support needs. I have established what I call comfort protocol systematic integration of supportive touch, emotional validation, and psychological care into standard military operations. These protocols include authorized physical affection between unit members, structured emotional processing sessions after combat engagements, and recognition that warrior effectiveness includes emotional resilience, not just emotional suppression. Knox's message included data showing that his unit had achieved the highest combat effectiveness ratings in Kalari military history, while also demonstrating unprecedented levels of psychological well-being, unit cohesion, and post-deployment adjustment. Success. Human therapist Lara, your therapeutic methodologies have transformed not just my individual psychological profile, but the operational culture of an entire military unit. However, these developments have created conflict with traditional Kalari military command structure. The message included reports of Knox facing disciplinary review for unauthorized modification of established military protocols and implementation of non-approved psychological interventions that compromise warrior conditioning. Command Authority has ordered psychological reevaluation of my unit to determine whether emotional awareness protocols have compromised combat readiness. Standard Kalari military doctrine classifies emotional connection and physical comfort as weaknesses that undermine operational effectiveness. Lara realized that Nox was facing the same institutional resistance to practical innovation that she'd encountered when introducing non-standard therapeutic approaches to clients who had been conditioned to view emotional awareness as weakness rather than strength. The communication continued with Nox's request for support that surprised Lara with its personal vulnerability. Human therapist Lara, I am requesting consultation on how to defend therapeutic integration against institutional pressure to return to complete emotional suppression. My soldiers have experienced the benefits of combining warrior effectiveness with emotional intelligence, but military authority considers this combination impossible. I do not want to lose the progress toward wholeness that our therapeutic work achieved, nor do I want my troops to lose the enhanced effectiveness and psychological well-being they have discovered through comfort protocols. Nox's message concluded with a request that transformed their therapeutic relationship into something neither had anticipated. I am requesting permission to implement therapeutic consultation for my entire unit via interstellar communication. My soldiers require support in articulating the value of emotional awareness to military command, and I believe your expertise in helping individuals integrate suppressed emotional capacity could assist in defending our innovations. Over the following weeks, Lara found herself conducting group therapeutic consultations with an entire Kalari military unit via long-range communication systems. The conversations revealed that Nox's soldiers had experienced the same psychological transformation that Nox had achieved through massage therapy reconnection with emotional capacity, improved self-awareness, and enhanced ability to provide and receive support. Human therapist Lara, reported Lieutenant Commander Vexron during one of their group sessions. Before General Nox introduced comfort protocols, I had not experienced physical affection or emotional validation in 23 years of military service. How has that change affected your military performance? My strategic thinking has improved because I am no longer expending psychological energy on emotional suppression. My leadership effectiveness has increased because I can recognize and respond to my soldiers' actual needs rather than just their stated tactical readiness. Similar reports came from soldiers throughout Nox's unit, describing how emotional awareness had enhanced rather than compromised their military capabilities. We fight better because we fight for each other, not just for mission objectives, reported Combat Specialist Torek. Physical comfort and emotional support have created unit bonds that make us more coordinated, more motivated, and more resilient under pressure. But their innovations faced increasing pressure from traditional military authority, culminating in a formal disciplinary hearing that would determine whether Nox's unit would be allowed to continue their emotionally aware approach to military service or forced return to standard psychological conditioning. Human therapist Lara, Nox communicated before the hearing. You helped me remember that I could be both General Nox 7 and Nox of the Blue Mountains. Now I must convince military command that warriors can be both emotionally intelligent and operationally effective. How can I support you in that hearing? By helping me explain that strength includes the courage to care, not just the ability to fight. As Nox prepared to defend his therapeutic innovations before Kalari military command, Lara realized that their work together had evolved from individual healing into a challenge to institutional assumptions about the relationship between emotional awareness and effective leadership under pressure. The disciplinary hearing was conducted via secured interstellar communication, and Lara found herself serving as expert witness in a military tribunal unlike anything in Kalari history. High Command had assembled to evaluate whether Nox's emotional contamination protocols represented innovation worthy of adoption or dangerous deviation requiring correction. Supreme Commander Valtar presided over the hearing with the formal authority of someone whose entire career had been built on traditional military doctrine. Her scarred armor and battle-tested demeanor indicated decades of successful leadership. through conventional approaches that emphasized emotional suppression and tactical focus above all other considerations. General Knox 7, Supreme Commander Veltar announced, "You are charged with unauthorized modification of established psychological conditioning protocols, implementation of non-approved therapeutic interventions, and compromise of unit combat readiness through introduction of emotional weakness factors." Knox stood before the tribunal with perfect military bearing, but Lara could see the color patterns in his armor plating that indicated intense internal processing. The same patterns she'd learned to recognize during their therapeutic sessions, when he was integrating conflicting psychological frameworks. "Supreme Commander, I request permission to present evidence that my modifications have enhanced, rather than compromised, combat readiness. General Knox 7, Emotional Awareness Protocols are fundamentally incompatible with warrior conditioning. Your unit's performance data, while statistically improved, does not overcome the theoretical weakness introduced by psychological softness." Lara realized that the tribunal was facing the same institutional resistance to practical innovation that she'd encountered in other contexts, the assumption that established doctrine was more reliable than demonstrated results. "Supreme Commander Veltar," Knox replied, "I request permission to demonstrate the operational effectiveness of integrated emotional awareness through practical assessment." "Explain your proposal, General." "Allow my unit to participate in combat simulation exercises against traditionally conditioned units of equivalent training and experience. Direct comparison will provide empirical data about the effectiveness of therapeutic integration versus standard psychological suppression." Supreme Commander Veltar consulted with her advisory staff before responding to Knox's challenge. "General Knox 7, simulation exercises will be authorized. However, if your emotionally contaminated unit demonstrates inferior performance compared to traditionally conditioned forces, you and your soldiers will undergo immediate psychological reconditioning to emanate therapeutic modifications. And if my unit demonstrates superior performance, then High Command will consider whether your innovations warrant broader implementation across Kaleri Defense Forces." The simulation exercises were conducted over 3 days, with Knox's therapeutically enhanced unit competing against elite, traditionally conditioned forces in scenarios designed to test combat effectiveness, strategic thinking, unit cohesion, and performance under extreme pressure. Lara monitored the results through real-time data transmission, watching as Knox's soldiers demonstrated the same integration of emotional awareness and tactical competence that Knox had achieved through their therapeutic work. The first exercise tested individual combat skills under stress. Traditional doctrine predicted that Knox's emotionally aware soldiers would be distracted by psychological processing that would interfere with tactical focus. Instead, the data showed that soldiers who had learned to recognize and manage their emotional states performed better under pressure because they weren't expending energy on emotional suppression. Combat Specialist Torek demonstrates 47% faster tactical decision-making and 23% improved accuracy under stress compared to baseline measurements taken before therapeutic integration, reported the simulation monitors. The second exercise evaluated unit coordination during complex multi-objective missions. Traditional military theory suggested that emotional awareness would create interpersonal complications that would interfere with efficient command structure. Instead, Knox's unit achieved unprecedented coordination because soldiers were able to communicate their actual psychological state and support needs, rather than pretending to optimal readiness regardless of circumstances. Unit cohesion metrics show 67% improvement in collaborative problem-solving and 89% reduction in miscommunication-related tactical errors, reported the assessment team. But the most challenging test came during the third exercise, which simulated the kind of high-casualty, high-stress scenario that traditional military doctrine assumed required complete emotional shutdown for effective performance. Knox's unit faced a scenario involving civilian evacuation under heavy enemy fire, with multiple casualties, equipment failures, and rapidly changing tactical situations that required both decisive action and adaptability to unexpected developments. Traditional military Analysis predicted that soldiers who maintained emotional awareness would be paralyzed by empathy, distracted by grief over casualties, and unable to make the hard tactical decisions required for mission success. Instead, Knox's soldiers demonstrated something that surprised even Lara: the ability to feel deeply about casualties and civilian suffering while simultaneously maintaining tactical effectiveness and mission focus. Lieutenant Commander Vexron shows physiological indicators of emotional processing regarding civilian casualties while simultaneously achieving optimal tactical decision-making and unit coordination, reported the monitoring systems. Combat. Medic Cole Rin demonstrates grief responses to soldier injuries while maintaining superior medical performance and psychological support for wounded personnel. The simulation data revealed that emotional awareness had enabled Knox's soldiers to process traumatic events in real time rather than suppressing them, which prevented the psychological backlog that typically led to post-combat stress disorders and declining long-term performance. Soldiers who experience and process emotions during combat operations show 78% reduction in post-traumatic stress indicators and 91% improvement in long-term psychological resilience compared to traditionally conditioned forces, concluded the assessment team. But the results that most impressed Supreme Commander Valtar came from leadership. Effectiveness metrics that measured how well Knox's therapeutic approach had prepared him for command decisions under extreme pressure. General Knox 7 demonstrates unprecedented ability to assess unit psychological state, make tactical decisions that account for both mission objectives and soldier well-being, and maintain unit morale during high-casualty scenarios, reported the Command Assessment Team. His integration of emotional intelligence with tactical thinking produces superior strategic outcomes because he can predict and respond to both enemy actions and friendly force psychological states. Supreme Commander Veltar reviewed the simulation data with expressions of professional amazement, mixed with institutional concern about departing from established doctrine. General Knox 7, your unit has achieved performance metrics that exceed traditionally conditioned forces across all evaluation categories. However, these results challenge fundamental assumptions about the relationship between emotional suppression and combat effectiveness. Supreme Commander, perhaps fundamental assumptions require reassessment when practical evidence demonstrates their limitations. General, adopting your therapeutic integration protocols across Kalari Defense Forces would represent the most significant change in military doctrine in our species. History. Knox's response carried the same integration of strength and vulnerability that Lara had observed during their most profound therapeutic breakthroughs. Supreme Commander, our species' greatest military victories have always required adapting to new realities rather than defending old assumptions. The evidence suggests that warriors who can both fight effectively and care deeply are stronger than warriors who can only fight effectively. The tribunal reached its decision after extensive consultation among high command officials, military psychologists, and strategic analysts who had spent decades building careers on traditional emotional suppression doctrine. Supreme Commander Veltar announced their conclusion with the formal gravity of historical significance. General Knox 7, High Command has determined that your therapeutic integration protocols demonstrate sufficient operational benefit to warrant pilot implementation across selected units of Kalari Defense Forces. But the decision came with conditions that created new challenges for Knox and his soldiers. However, implementation will require development of standardized training procedures, oversight mechanisms, and evaluation protocols to ensure consistent results across different units and command structures. Knox realized that his personal therapeutic breakthrough was about to face the same institutional pressures that had challenged other innovations. The demand to systematize and standardize what had emerged through individual adaptation and relationship-based healing. Supreme Commander, I believe effective implementation requires understanding that therapeutic integration cannot be standardized like technical procedures. Each unit must develop emotional awareness through gradual practice and supportive mentorship, not through imposed protocols. General, military efficiency requires scalable implementation procedures. With respect, Supreme Commander, emotional intelligence requires personal development that cannot be efficiently scaled. It must be cultivated through patient practice and supportive relationships. As the hearing concluded with authorization for broader implementation of Knox's innovations, Lara realized that their therapeutic work had created a new challenge: how to share the benefits of emotional integration without losing the personal, relationship-based approach that had made it effective. 6 months after the tribunal decision, Lara found herself in the most unexpected role of her career, serving as Chief Therapeutic Consultant for the Kalari Defense Force's new Emotional Intelligence Integration Program. But instead of developing standardized protocols, as High Command had initially requested, she was working with Knox to create something unprecedented: a military training approach based on the same principles that guided effective massage therapy. Human therapist Lara, Knox reported during one of their strategic planning sessions. Initial attempts to standardize therapeutic integration have produced concerning results. They were reviewing data from 3 pilot units that had undergone traditional military training adapted to include emotional awareness components. The results showed some improvement in unit cohesion and stress management, but nothing approaching the transformation Knox's original unit had achieved. The units show 23% improvement in psychological resilience metrics and 15% improvement in collaborative decision-making. But they lack the profound emotional connection and authentic vulnerability that characterizes my soldiers' development. Lara had been expecting this result based on her understanding of how therapeutic relationships actually worked versus how institutions typically tried to systematize them. Knox, what's different about how your soldiers learned emotional integration compared to how the pilot units are being trained? My unit developed emotional awareness through individual relationships, gradual trust building, and personal mentorship that responded to each soldier's unique psychological profile and background. And the pilot units? They are receiving standardized emotional intelligence curriculum, group training exercises, and evaluation procedures that treat emotional development like technical skill acquisition. Knox's armor plating was shifting through the deep blue and gold patterns that Lara had learned to associate with his most profound insights about the integration of warrior effectiveness and emotional authenticity. Human therapist Lara, I believe we have discovered the same truth that governs your massage. Therapy practice emotional healing cannot be efficiently systematized because it requires personal attention, individual adaptation, and caring relationships. Right. Just like I can't give effective massage therapy by following a standardized procedure, you can't teach emotional intelligence through standardized training. It has to be developed through mentorship and practice. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Supreme Commander Veltar, who had come to evaluate the program's initial results and determine whether broader implementation should continue. General Knox 7, Human Therapist Lara, initial pilot unit results suggest that therapeutic integration may not be as easily scalable as High Command projected. Knox stood with the perfect military bearing he maintained during formal interactions, but Lara could see the color patterns that indicated he was preparing to defend their approach against institutional pressure for faster, more efficient results. Supreme Commander, we have identified the core issue with standardized implementation. Emotional intelligence cannot be taught. Like technical skills, it must be developed through mentorship relationships and individual attention. General, military efficiency requires training methodologies that can produce consistent results across large numbers of personnel without requiring individual customization. Lara stepped forward, realizing that this conversation would determine whether their therapeutic innovations could survive institutional demands for scalability. Supreme Commander, may I explain how this challenge relates to my massage therapy practice? Proceed, Human Therapist. When I work with clients, I can't use the same techniques on everyone and expect the same results. Each person has different trauma patterns, different comfort levels, different ways of processing touch and emotional connection. The effectiveness comes from adapting my approach to each individual's needs. Supreme Commander Veltar was consulting her tactical analysis systems while processing this explanation. Human Therapist Lara, you are describing a methodology that cannot be efficiently replicated across military forces numbering in the millions. Supreme Commander, Knox interjected, what if efficient replication is the wrong goal? What if the goal should be effective development, even if it requires more time and individual attention? General, military operations cannot accommodate inefficient training timelines. Lara realized that they were facing a fundamental conflict between institutional efficiency and therapeutic effectiveness, the same tension she'd encountered when spa management wanted her to see more clients per day with shorter appointment times. Supreme Commander, what if we approached this differently? Instead of trying to train millions of soldiers simultaneously, what if we focused on training military leaders who could then provide therapeutic mentorship to their own units? Explain this alternative framework. Knox's armor plating shifted to bright gold patterns as he processed Lara's suggestion and recognized its potential for resolving the scalability challenge. Supreme Commander, we could implement therapeutic leadership development rather than standardized emotional intelligence training. Military commanders would learn to provide the same kind of caring attention and individual support to their soldiers that Lara provided to me during our therapeutic sessions. This approach would create cascading mentorship relationships throughout military command structure, Lara continued. Each therapeutically trained leader would work with a small group of subordinate officers, providing individual attention and emotional support. Those officers would then provide similar mentorship to their soldiers. Supreme Commander Veltar was analyzing this proposal with the strategic thinking she applied to complex military operations. You are proposing distributed therapeutic leadership rather than centralized emotional intelligence training. Exactly. Just like effective massage therapy requires individual attention and adaptation, effective emotional integration requires personal mentorship that responds to each soldier's unique needs and background. But this approach would require fundamental changes in military leadership philosophy, command relationships, and officer training protocols. Knox stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had experienced the benefits of integration firsthand. Supreme Commander, my unit's performance demonstrates that these changes produce superior results. My soldiers are more effective because I learned to provide the same kind of caring attention and individual support that enabled my own therapeutic development. And the pilot units that receive standardized training, they show modest improvement because they received information about emotional intelligence, but they lack the deep transformation that comes from actually experiencing caring leadership and supportive mentorship. Supreme Commander Veltar was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of completely restructuring military leadership around therapeutic principles rather than traditional command hierarchies. General Knox 7, Human Therapist Lara, you are proposing that Kalari Defense Forces adopt caring relationships as the foundation of military effectiveness. We are proposing that caring relationships enhance military effectiveness rather than compromising it, Lara replied. Knox's soldiers fight better because they feel cared for and supported, not despite feeling cared for and supported. And military leaders become more effective when they learn to provide therapeutic attention to their soldiers' well-being rather than focusing solely on tactical performance. Supreme Commander Veltar activated her communication systems to consult with High Command about this radical departure from traditional military doctrine. After extensive consultation, she returned with a decision that would transform Kalari military culture. General Knox 7, Human Therapist Lara, High Command has authorized implementation of therapeutic leadership development across senior officer ranks. You will establish training programs that teach military commanders to provide caring mentorship and individual emotional support to their subordinates. Supreme Commander, this represents the most significant change in military philosophy in Kalari history, Knox observed. General, your unit's performance metrics and the comparative data from pilot programs provide compelling evidence that caring leadership produces superior military outcomes. High Command prioritizes operational effectiveness over traditional doctrine. Over the following months, Lara found herself working with Knox to develop training programs that taught senior military officers to provide the same kind of caring, attention, and therapeutic support that had transformed Knox's relationship with his own soldiers. The training centered not on standardized emotional intelligence protocols, but on developing each leader's capacity for individual attention, empathetic listening, and supportive touch skills that paralleled what Lara used in massage therapy, but adapted for military leadership contexts. Commander Zalek, Knox instructed during one of their leadership development sessions, observe your soldiers' color patterns and breathing rhythms, the same way human therapist Lara learned to read my physical tension patterns. Their bodies will tell you about their emotional state and stress levels before they can verbalize their support needs. General, how do I respond when I identify stress indicators? The same way Lara responded when she identified my chronic tension with caring attention, supportive touch when appropriate, an individual conversation that helps them process whatever they're experiencing. The results exceeded even Lara's expectations for how therapeutic principles could transform military culture. As senior officers learned to provide caring leadership, their units began demonstrating the same improvements in performance, resilience, and unit cohesion that Knox's original soldiers had achieved. But more importantly, the cultural shift created a cascade of emotional healing throughout the military as soldiers who received caring support from their leaders learned to provide similar care to their peers and subordinates. Human therapist Lara, Knox reported during their 6-month evaluation, therapeutic leadership development has produced improvements that extend beyond military performance metrics. What kind of improvements? Soldiers who experience caring support from their leaders are returning to their families and communities with enhanced capacity for emotional connection, supportive relationships, and psychological resilience. The therapeutic principles are transforming not just military effectiveness, but the broader social fabric of Kalari society. Lara realized that what had begun as individual massage therapy for one traumatized warrior had evolved into a cultural transformation that was helping an entire species rediscover the integration of strength and emotional authenticity. 2 years after Knox first walked into Lara's massage room seeking physical maintenance for combat efficiency optimization, she stood before the Galactic Council presenting the most comprehensive study of therapeutic military leadership ever documented. But what moved her most wasn't the statistical data, it was the personal transformation she witnessed in Knox as he addressed the assembled representatives from 47 species. Delegates, Knox announced, his armor plating displaying the warm gold and blue patterns that had become his signature since learning emotional integration. I stand before you not just as General Knox 7 of the Kalari Defense Forces, but as Knox of the Blue Mountains, who was never actually eliminated, only temporarily suppressed. The council chamber fell silent as Knox described his journey from emotionally suppressed warrior to therapeutically integrated leader who had revolutionized an entire military culture. Human therapist Lara taught me that strength includes the courage to be vulnerable, to care deeply, and to provide emotional support to others. This lesson has transformed not only my individual effectiveness, but the operational culture of Kalari Defense Forces. Knox activated holographic displays showing comprehensive data from the therapeutic leadership program's implementation across military units throughout the Kalari territories. Units led by therapeutically trained commanders show 94% improvement in combat effectiveness, 89% reduction in post-traumatic stress disorders, and unprecedented levels of unit cohesion and psychological resilience. But the most significant impact extends beyond military performance to cultural transformation throughout Kalari society. The data revealed that soldiers who received caring leadership were returning to their communities with enhanced capacity for emotional connection, supportive parenting, and collaborative problem-solving that was transforming family structures, educational approaches, and civic engagement across the entire species. Therapeutic principles learned through military leadership development are being applied to education, healthcare, engineering, and virtually every aspect of Kalari social organization. Ambassador Valtara from the Andromedan Collective raised questions about the scalability of relationship-based approaches to organizational management. General Knox 7, how can other species adapt these therapeutic principles to their unique cultural and physiological characteristics? Knox's response reflected the same wisdom that Lara had learned through years of adapting massage techniques to diverse alien anatomies and psychologies. Ambassador, therapeutic principles must be adapted to local conditions rather than standardized across different cultures. Each species must develop their own approaches to caring leadership and emotional integration, based on their natural relationship patterns and communication methods. Director Cole Ten, from the Rigelian Research Consortium, requested clarification about the practical implementation challenges. General, what obstacles have you encountered in transforming military culture, and how might civilian organizations prepare for similar transformations? Director, the primary obstacle was institutional resistance to the idea that caring relationships enhance rather than compromise operational effectiveness. Overcoming this resistance required demonstrating superior results rather than defending theoretical frameworks. Knox's advice reflected the same practical wisdom that had guided Lara's approach to therapeutic innovation. Focus on what works rather than what institutional doctrine says should work. Successful implementation requires patient development of mentorship relationships and individual attention to each person's unique needs and background. Efficiency cannot be prioritized over effectiveness when dealing with emotional intelligence development. Following Knox's presentation, Lara addressed the Council about the broader implications of therapeutic principles for interspecies cooperation and galactic community development. Delegates, what we've learned through transforming Kalari military culture applies to any organization or community that wants to enhance effectiveness through caring relationships and emotional intelligence. But the most important discovery is that therapeutic touch, whether literal physical touch or metaphorical emotional support, creates healing that benefits both the provider and recipient. Lara shared data from her expanded practice, which now included clients from dozens of species who are learning to integrate emotional awareness with their professional responsibilities. When people learn to provide caring support to others, they experience their own emotional healing and enhanced effectiveness. Knox's soldiers discovered this truth. They became better warriors by learning to care for traumatized civilians and support their fellow soldiers emotionally. The presentation concluded with the establishment of the Galactic Therapeutic Leadership Initiative, a collaborative program designed to help organizations throughout the galaxy develop caring leadership approaches adapted to their unique cultural contexts. Rather than standardizing specific techniques, this initiative will support local development of therapeutic principles through mentorship networks, cultural adaptation, and gradual implementation that respects each community's natural relationship patterns. 6 months later, Lara found herself in the familiar setting of her massage room at Harmony Wellness Spa. But now her practice had evolved to include something she'd never anticipated: training sessions for military officers, corporate leaders, educators, and healthcare providers from across the galaxy who wanted to learn therapeutic touch and caring leadership principles. Knox, who had become her primary collaborator in developing these programs, maintained his regular appointments for individual massage therapy while simultaneously serving as chief therapeutic leadership advisor for multiple species, military, and civilian organizations. Human therapist Lara, Knox said during one of their sessions, "I must report developments that continue to surprise me." What kind of developments? Kalari children who have parents trained in therapeutic leadership principles are demonstrating unprecedented levels of emotional intelligence, creative problem solving, and collaborative skills. Knox's armor displayed the soft purple and gold patterns he showed when discussing the most meaningful aspects of his transformation. Young Kalari, who grow up receiving caring attention and emotional support, are naturally integrating the warrior strength of our military tradition with the emotional authenticity that I had to rediscover through therapeutic work. They're not having to choose between being strong and being emotionally connected. They are developing as naturally integrated beings who understand that true strength includes emotional intelligence, caring relationships, and vulnerability as forms of courage. Lara continued her massage work while processing the long-term implications of what Knox was describing: an entire generation growing up with the integration of emotional awareness and practical effectiveness that most adults had to learn through deliberate therapeutic development. Knox, it sounds like you're creating a culture where children won't need to undergo the kind of psychological reconstruction that separated you from your original nature. Exactly. Future Kalari warriors will be trained in tactical effectiveness and emotional intelligence simultaneously, rather than having emotional capacity suppressed and later rediscovered through therapeutic intervention. As their session concluded, Knox shared one final observation that captured the essence of their collaboration's impact. Human therapist Lara, when I first came to you seeking physical maintenance for combat efficiency optimization, I could not have imagined that massage therapy would transform an entire species' understanding of the relationship between strength and caring. And I couldn't have imagined that helping one traumatized warrior would lead to revolutionizing military leadership throughout the galaxy. Knox's armor settled into the warm, stable gold that Lara had learned to associate with his deepest sense of integration and contentment. Perhaps the most profound discovery is that the most important revolutions begin with one person caring enough to provide individual attention and emotional support to another person who needs healing. And that healing creates ripple effects that transform communities, organizations, and eventually entire cultures. As Lara prepared to close her practice for the day, she reflected on how her simple desire to help people feel better through therapeutic touch had become part of a galactic movement toward more caring, emotionally intelligent approaches to leadership, education, and community development. Sometimes the most important work happened not through grand gestures or institutional changes, but through one person at a time learning that they deserved comfort, support, and caring attention, and then discovering their own capacity to provide the same healing to others.